and begin the webinar. One of the things that we had the ITTS hosted the Freight in the Southeast conference, and Chris Collins asked that Drew make a presentation on what he's doing with the Louisiana Supply Chain Transportation Council. And in doing so, several states expressed an interest in how Louisiana had structured this. And so Drew made the presentation in St. Louis, and that led for other states to be interested in hearing more about what was going on. And they asked Drew if he'd be interested in doing another webinar, which we are doing now. This is being recorded, and I will post it up on the ITTS website. And of course, the video link will be sent out to the ITTS members. So having said that, Drew, whenever you're ready, you can go ahead and introduce yourself again and kind of go through the materials.
Sure. Thanks, Bruce. As Bruce said, my name is Drew Ratcliff. I'm a Regional Disaster Recovery Manager with the Capital Region Planning Commission in Baton Rouge. As part of that role, which I'll kind of get into later on, I assume the duties of administering the Louisiana Supply Chain Transportation Council, which is the state of Louisiana recovery and resilience initiative with an overarching goal of increasing the collaboration between the public and private sectors and working towards a more resilient and robust commercial transportation system. So what I hope people would come away from in St. Louis, and what I hope y'all come away from, is kind of thinking more about risk in supply chain, wherever that might be, and even the risk or the points in the supply chain that are 2 or 3 points removed from you, and how that might affect you or what you oversee. And then maybe get some ideas about how your state could do something like this. And I'll talk a little, I'm going to go into how we started and what we're doing now. But one thing that, I brought up in St. Louis, and I like to stress when I talk about it, is that supply chain disruptions are seen. There's been some studies and interviews with executives, and they say that supply chain resiliency or disruptions are probably one of the highest threats to their companies or firms. Yet they don't insure it. Supply chain disruption is not insured. A lot of firms and even small businesses don't really do well in planning for it. In fact, Accenture said that a supply chain disruption, a significant supply chain disruption, can actually result in a 7% reduction in a company's share price. So when we're talking about resiliency, this is I've sat in meetings where I've heard people go on for hours and hours arguing on what resiliency is, and in my opinion, that they're overthinking it. It's a rather simple concept, but it's different. The resiliency in the supply from a supply chain and transportation standpoint might be a little bit different than the basic engineering definition, which I have there, is the tendency of a material to return to its original shape after the removal of stress. Well, the way we look at it, or the way we're looking at it in Louisiana, is not really returning back to normal maybe, but returning to a state that's better and then can withstand a repeat occurrence or other occurrences of disruptions or events. Adverse weather events we have top 3 causes of supply chain disruption. I mean, I could see them being easily number 1. And as you see that, there's a kind of a little reverse curve there, the arrow pointing to the left, showing you the relationship between vulnerability and capability, and then kind of as an indicator of resilience there. And another thing that we kind of stress, I want to get out of the way, is that strength and redundancy of a supply chain is, strength and redundancy of infrastructure is probably the strongest component of resilience. And when we're talking about supply chain, I think of that as multimodal or just modal optionality on the supply chain. So we got those out of the way. What I'm going to go through now is the 2016 Louisiana floods, the how, why, and what of the Supply Chain Council, what we're doing, and then the future. So in St. Louis, and when I've given this presentation before, I usually ask people by a show of hands if they were even aware that Louisiana had two majorly disruptive flood events in 2016. So in March and August of 2016, we had basically what were two slow-moving storms that dumped a bunch of rain on the state and caused floods that nobody had ever seen before or thought of before, really. And that resulted in 56 of 64 of our parishes, which parishes are counties in Louisiana because we like to do things differently. So 56 or 64 of them were under a federally declared disaster in 2016. And actually, by the end of 2016, Livingston Parish right there was actually under 3, and so was Orleans because they had a tornado go through. But these green parishes right here were the ones that were both declared from the March and August floods. So in the March flood, what I have here is the the annual exceedance probability. So that's a measurement of rain in a spot and what meteorologists think the probability that amount of rain would be exceeded. If you see those 4 dark blue circles up there underneath Ruston, those are where you have the 0.1% chance in that spot in a given point in time. That means that's your kind of proverbial or 1,000-year flood or rain event. I don't like to say the 1,000-year event because it's misleading. In doing recovery from these floods, you hear people say, "Oh, it's a 1,000-year flood." Well, we really don't know that. You don't know. We don't have good enough data to say that this is going to happen only once in every 1,000 years, and that's just not what it means anyway. Because you had a 1,000-year rain event in 2016 doesn't mean it's not going to happen for another 1,000 years. So we're trying to kind of push people to talking more about the probability, and this is actually what it is. So you had a 1 in 1,000 chance of that amount of rain falling in those spots. But if you kind of go out from the concentric little rings there, you see that goes to a 1 in 500 and then a 1 in 200. So those are using the older terms, your 1 in 500 year, your 500 year and 100 year rains through a large portion of the northern part of the state of Louisiana. And that's important because we'll been talking about the August flood. That was over 4 days. And what did that do? Well, it was pretty bad for the rivers in the northern part of the state. The J. Bennett Johnson Red River Waterway and the Ouachita River were the most severely impacted. The Ouachita River has 2 inland ports on it, and it failed to meet the standards for navigation for the first time in its history. And then the J. Bennett Johnson Waterway has 3 multimodal ports, and it's pretty critical for moving agricultural products and for the communities there just because of the supply chain efficiencies that they achieve via moving things by barge. Well, it was closed for an extended period of time because of the silt loads that the floods carried.
Hey, Drew, this is Bruce, yep. and I want to clarify something. If you have questions in the middle of the slides, don't hesitate to ask. And my comment to Drew was, you had all this sediment. How did the Corps get the authorization to go and clean up all that? There's still questions about rivers and historic rivers and non-navigable waterways that are not covered by the Corps. How did the Corps respond to all of the sediment in the channels? For the Red River, I do not know how they actually got that cleared up. But more to your point, where you're talking about,
all the different agencies and things that have oversight. We brought in, through another group that I'm part of, the Louisiana Resilient Recovery Initiative, we had a symposium in the Amite River watershed. And the intended audiences were mayors, parish presidents, council members, floodplain managers, those, your officials that are involved in things related to the watershed. So we had about a 45-minute panel, and we had GOSEP, Wildlife and Fisheries, and the Corps of Engineers up there. And basically what our audience wanted to know was, who can let us dredge out our waterways? And we're not even talking about navigable waterways. We're talking about some that are like the Amite River that are under the Louisiana Scenic Waterways Act. And honestly, they got up there and they each said kind of what they oversaw, and there was so much overlap. I don't think anybody in the audience had a clear picture, even after they were all talking and over who had authority over what. So it's in each scenario, it's sort of case by case, and I could be off base on that, but that has been my observation in working more on with helping municipalities in their recovery.
Thank you, Drew. Yeah, because I live on the Bogafly, and we got a foot. I came up to our slab on one flood, and it was a foot lower the second flood. So that's always been an issue about this non-navigable waterway. So
well, I'm not sure. There was actually a bill that went through in the 2017 session, and there was another bill in this past session that kind of opened up some wiggle room for localities to do some dredging, clearing, and snagging of some of those scenic and non-navigable waterways. But once you do that, you get into a whole load of other issues when it comes to how the dredging affects wetlands and things like that. It can be a really, really complicated deal.
Yeah, well, I didn't mean to take up so much of your time, but I was just curious.
Sure.
Thank you.
Yeah. So you can see there, the navigable waterways were really heavily affected. The rail impacts, pretty bad too. KCS shut down both their main lines in the state for almost a month. The UP was closed for 9 days. In fact, I mean, the ripple effect was felt all across the state. Pretty much every railroad in the state had to shut down, every short line and connecting railroad, because of those two mainline closures. And the UP notified their customers nationwide that they were going to expect about 48 hours in delays. And if somebody say there's somebody in a plant that's banking on a tank car to come in, and they've run into an outage or something like that, and that tank car is delayed 48 hours, they're either looking at shutting down the plant, or they're costing 4 or 5 times more to ship that same whatever material they need that's coming in on the tank car via truck to keep that plant running. So these effects can start compounding themselves. Just a little bit on our rail here. That's 2,900 jobs in the state of Louisiana connected to rail. Those are all, not all of them, but a lot of them were affected by that shutdown. When it comes to our highways, portions of 10, 20, and 49 were closed, and approximately 450 state roads. And the real important one that I know was a big mess, and for the first time in history, this part of I-10 right here at the border across the Sabine, it was closed for a couple of days, and that caused a lot of headaches. Combined impact, according to stakeholders, that EDA contractors conducted a lot of stakeholder interviews, and they basically found that it was significant. They haven't quantified it, as how many billions of dollars. If someone wanted to do that, I think they would pass out from the number, but they came away with pretty confident that the impact was significant and felt across all economic sectors. So the August flood. Remember I told you all about 4 days with the probability of the 1,000-year flood. Excuse me, the 1,000-year or the 0.1% rain chance in North Louisiana. Well, an August flood impacted primarily South Louisiana, and there you have 2 days with 3 areas that exceeded the 1 in 1,000 annual exceedance probability. This big blue thing right here, which is basically Central, Denham Springs, Watson, that's Livingston Parish, East Baton Rouge Parish, and then Lafayette. And again, you see where the rain just kind of built out from there. So you've got the 1 in 1,000, 500, and 200. Now this is a new slide. I came across the forecast for the 48 hours prior. So this was issued on the Thursday, and the rain really started in the August flood on the Friday. And there's a warning there, a prediction of about 6.5 inches right there over 48 hours. Well, if you look over here, that's a pretty big whoopsie right there. Those white spots are over 2 feet of rain in 48 hours. So I liked adding that. When I found this, I thought this was good. That it really illustrates the point that even though our forecasting has gotten really, it's gotten much more advanced, and our meteorologists keep making great advances in this, they're not infallible, and they can make a big mistake like this. We can't plan for things like this. We can just hope to mitigate it and have a supply chain that can withstand it. And actually talking to one of the state climatologists, the way he described this August flood event was the rain event was sort of an unnamed tropical system. It was a low pressure that moved slowly across the state and kind of formed up overnight, and it had all the characteristics of a tropical system without a name, and we just happened to have this available precipitation in the air. There was basically so much evaporated moisture in the air. If you were to imagine the room you're in is like a column of air, it was just absolutely saturated to the point of the measurements were just off the charts, and that's what generated all that water. The meteorologists, I remember, were aware of it, but I don't know if they didn't put 2 and 2 together, or they just didn't think that the system was going to trigger all that much rain. We don't have, or at least I don't have yet, really great numbers to share on the impacts of the August flood events. I think it was kind of a combination of when I say we, it was when I was working with FEMA and the NDRF, National Disaster Recovery Framework. We were already kind of in recovery mode from the March floods when the August flood happened. In fact, we were talking about our strategy in the Joint Field Office here in Baton Rouge when the federal coordinating officer, who was the person from FEMA who basically runs the show in the state and responding to a disaster, was being pulled out every 30 minutes or so, and I was sitting there watching in real time as he got updates on, okay, well, this is closed now and this is closed now. Oh, guess what? By the way, FCO Stoller, the governor has declared a state of emergency. It was really something else to watch. And then and that was Friday morning. I guess they sent us home by that afternoon. Certainly that evening, pictures started rolling in of or videos of water rescues and people in their homes and water just shooting right up, coming up to 3 or 4 feet, chest deep in their houses. The main thing that really hit a lot of folks here in this August flood were these impacts on multiple closures on I-10 and I-12. We had motorists stranded on I-12 for up to 48 hours. State police had to helicopter in food and water to them. The rain, as I said, started around August 11th. On August 16th, the Secretary of DOTD made the decision to open some of these interstates and highways to truck traffic, and they had over 8 inches of water on them. And he said specifically, we've got to get commerce moving. We have to do this. Normally they wouldn't if it was wasn't such an extended period. Now, this happened a couple weeks ago right here by my office, and actually by the DOTD office. And I added it here just to be kind of illustrative of, we've been talking a lot about these larger flood events. Well, this was just a flash flood that popped up. I don't even remember if it was supposed to rain that day. I mean, I just remember it rained god awful hard for about 30 minutes, and then we start seeing these pictures popping up, and the water came up and shot back down, but it was enough to close this little section of 110 for a couple hours and ruin these folks' day right here. All right, so talked a little bit about the disaster. Now, what is the Supply Chain Transportation Council? I've got to kind of back up a little bit, because the Transportation Council was an initiative that was born out of the Economic Recovery Support Function, which is a component of the National Disaster Recovery Framework. And all that is really is it's a document that guides federal agencies on how they are to recover from disaster and how they can bring resources to an area that is affected by a disaster and how they coordinate. And FEMA is the one that kind of coordinates that coordination, for lack of a better term. Well, they split up the National Disaster Recovery Framework into these 6 recovery support functions. And one of them is the Economic Recovery Support Function. And what the Economic Recovery Support Function did was they gathered a lot of this information that I'm sharing with y'all, and they'll go into a disaster and they'll do what's called a mission scope, and they'll gather data on the effects of a disaster, and then they'll submit that, and then they'll do what they call a recovery support strategy. In that recovery support strategy, contractors with the EDA, Economic Development Administration, and Louisiana Economic Development said they recognize the need for better cooperation before, during, and after a disaster, especially when it comes to transportation and supply chain. So they came up with this goal, and there it is right there, to form a supply chain network to engage business and agricultural interests in support of transportation resilience and enhanced transportation systems. So what came out of that is the Supply Chain Transportation Council. So they started holding meetings with executives and leaders in state agencies and put together this public-private partnership, and those are a lot of our partners right there. You see their logos. And we have membership or representation in the council from all of these areas in the public sector, state government, federal government, universities, and in the private sector, a lot of these organizations that are representing transportation.
Drew?
Yes.
On this SCTC, this is Cheryl from Missouri, by the way.
Hey.
Is this somehow related back into Louisiana's Freight Advisory Council? Is this in place of it, or are these not connected at all? A lot of the things are partners. It looks like they're a similar group. I'm wondering if one could function as both.
So our executive director at CRPC, Jamie Setz, has, I believe, brought that possibility up, of the Supply Chain Council functioning as a freight council for DOTD. But to my knowledge, other than the fact that we enjoy a good deal of support and participation from DOTD on, participating in the meetings and supporting us by giving us mission data and things like that, and hosting meetings. I don't know if there's any other connection, but it is not right now functioning as a freight council. or an official freight council for DOTD. Does that answer your question?
It did. Thank you very much.
Sure. So they started kind of meeting every once in a while, and as everything started coming together, and they started identifying stakeholders to be members or to be a part of the supply chain council, they came up with this mission statement, and then they self-organized into an executive committee and a GIS committee and a technology and innovation committee and named co-chairs. And where I kind of came along was I was in my position as a regional disaster recovery manager. My job is actually funded by the Economic Development Administration, and the contractors that were working with EDA here in Baton Rouge were pulled off due to Harvey and Maria and Irma. So I have a background in recovery and also in logistics and public and government affairs for a midstream oil company. So this is kind of, it just by happenstance fit really nicely into what I've been doing. So that EDA asked me to kind of take over the administration of this and see it through and keep it going, because they had really gotten the ball rolling, and we have a lot of great, if you see, we've got all these partners at the table wanting to get something done. So we're right now we're really trying to focus on getting a report to the legislature, because we've enjoyed great support from our state agencies and from the governor's office, and now from the legislature as well. They passed two concurrent resolutions to recognize us, to set some tasks and goals for us, and then asked us to submit a report to them by March 1st, 2019, that just basically study supply chain and transportation vulnerabilities, and then make recommendations on increasing the resiliency, and this is the actual wording, in various modes of transportation through communication, collaboration, development of GIS technologies, and new innovations. So right now, that's a really broad, big goal. We're seeking funding to do that, but in the meantime, we've kind of come to the realization that the Capital Region Planning Commission is going to have to really step up to put something together, start collecting the data, and get something to the legislature by 2019. Our goal is to try to keep this council going past 2019. In fact, we want to make a kind of a 5-year plan and then a 20-year economic competitiveness plan, because behind all this is the Economic Development Administration. So the goal is, with a resilient supply chain, we're building really a resilient Louisiana economy. I put this up here, the Federal Highways Vulnerability Assessment, Adaptation Assessment Framework. You can find this online. This is a really, really great tool. We're going to kind of somewhat mirror it. We're going to kind of pick and choose from all these steps, but this is kind of, what we're going to do, and that, articulate our objectives and start defining and identifying vulnerable assets and vulnerable spots, and what that means to be vulnerable, and then project out where are these trouble spots? For instance, where has the interstate had to be shut down over how many times over a certain for how long over a certain time frame, and then what can we do about that, and then make these recommendations in a report to. It'll go to the legislature, of course, and then it'll also go to DOTD, and through the Louisiana Planning and Development District Association of Louisiana Planning and Development Districts, and through our cooperation. So CRPC is actually the NPO for the Baton Rouge area. We will push out our findings to the other NPOs so that they can incorporate those resiliency ideas into their 5-year long-range transportation plans. CRPC, we just got done with ours, so ours won't be another 5 years out, but I know that there's several of the MPOs in this state are working on theirs right now, or they have theirs coming up. Because this will be, while this FCTC is kind of, we meet in Baton Rouge and CRPC is in Baton Rouge. This is a statewide study and initiative. I put this in there. I found this in doing some research. Flying saucers for everybody, that would be a wonderful solution, but it's probably not going to happen.
How would you tax those flying vehicles to improve the highway funds?
We'd probably have to charge a
vehicle miles traveled fee, annual vehicle miles traveled?
Vehicle miles travel fee, a transponder on them, and then I guess they're on jet fuel, increase the tax on jet fuel. Or maybe you put some sort of carbon emission tax on them. They probably suck some gas. Bruce, I had this for ITTS as part of kind of, for the St. Louis presentation as part of tying the panel all in together. I can skip this if you want, or.
Well, you've already showed it and explained it. You might as well just take a second and go through it.
All right. So when we were talking about interrupted supply chains in St. Louis, Bruce asked me to kind of consider a nightmare scenario in Baton Rouge, and to me that would be, and this was Bruce kind of leading me here too, would be if a barge got loose or something, or and struck one of the pylons for the old Mississippi River Bridge, which it's actually the US 190 bridge. In Baton Rouge we have two bridges: the new bridge, which was, everybody calls it the new bridge, even though it was built in 1968 or opened in 68, and the old bridge is from the 20s or 30s. Huey Long has built the thing. Anyway, it's a major. It's got a rail crossing on it. It's where KCS crosses the Mississippi River there. It's not where the majority of truck traffic goes across, but it's certainly a good relief valve there. It doesn't get it nearly as much regular car traffic, but as the 10 bridge right there. But if it was taken out, I mean, we already get major backups and headaches right here at 110 and 10 at the bridge. But if this was gone, complete gridlock there. The congestion would just be unbelievable. And then not to mention having the KCS unable to cross the Mississippi River right there. And thinking of that in terms of just, one supply chain, say if there's do I have a map on here? No. I took this from DOTD's Transportation Asset Management Plan. Say if there's a well drilling up there in West Feliciana Parish or East Feliciana in the Tuscaloosa Marine Shale, in a rural area, they're probably connected to just a small tank. They're relying on a truck driver to come in and keep that tank empty, or the well's got to shut down. Well, that truck driver is maybe delivering to Exxon or another collection of pipeline facility somewhere in North Baton Rouge. Well, first of all, he's going to be delayed. If refinery in Baton Rouge cannot, or some of the collection points in Baton Rouge cannot unload some of their crude oil, then he's got no place to take it either. And then you'd have a lot of inefficiencies in, say, if the KCS is bringing some frac sand over the bridge through a manifest train, or you got a unit train of crude coming across or coming out. Just that one bridge would absolutely throw the production side. Well, actually, every part of the oil industry in Baton Rouge and into chaos. It probably would. At the very least, it would cost them a whole lot of money and inefficiencies. and having to ship some things via alternate routes. You're talking about 4 trucks for every rail car. So kind of in a little summary of what we did there when I was thinking about this, of kind of getting the Supply Chain Council stood up and some of the setbacks and trying to identify funding and actually coming through the flood and what Louisiana is looking at and how it looked in August of 2016 and how it looks now. It reminded me of my favorite Willie Nelson song, Me and Paul, where he says, "It's been rough and rocky traveling, but I'm finally standing upright on the ground." And I thought about it even more. I think I'm going to make Willie Nelson my face of resiliency because, number one, he's still alive, and number two, he's been through a whole hell of a lot, and he's declared bankruptcy a couple of times, and he's still here, and he's still kicking, and he's doing well. And then that right there is, as I mentioned, one of the challenges. Well, as I mentioned, that the members of the Supply Chain Council are all represented by executives and leadership from these. So these are a lot of busy folks. So nailing all those people down, that was just a sampling. We've got probably about over 20 members, or regular participating members. Nailing all those folks down can be like herding cats. So that's a gif of people herding cats.
Thank you very much, Drew. I have a question for you. I sat through this presentation twice.
Yep.
And one of the things I was thinking about was, these programs, there's a lot of energy, they get started, and then after there's a deliverable or they have a couple meetings, the interest wanes, the participation wanes. How are y'all planning on keeping this an active, ongoing dialogue, especially after you deliver your report next year?
So there are 3 ways. One is that actually probably 4. As we do the report, we're hoping to have some feedback, right? So this report, as we go on stages, we're going to bring it to the council every time and say, hey, this is where we are. This is your opportunity to weigh in. If you don't like something or you want this recommendation made from a public-private partnership, from sort of a group that's representing the public sector and the private sector, that kind of recommendation to the legislature and DOTD, if you want your input in there, please stay engaged. After we do this report, this first report is, at this stage of the game, not going to be as robust as we want it to be, or as it can be. So we envision it being sort of a preliminary report. It's going to have actionable things in there, and it is going to have some good research, and it's going to be backed by data. But our recommendations are going to be backed by data. But it will also say this is what we are going to continue to work on, because we have a lot of other things that we can look at and a lot of other aspects of and possible disruptions and aspects of the supply chain and transportation network in the state that we want to look at. What exactly parts we're going to look at for the report. They're probably going to focus mostly on flooding. But not every aspect of flooding will be able to be addressed probably. As we move forward, we're going to start looking at other natural hazards. And then we have some of the man-made hazards. So a lot of our members are part of the governor's cybersecurity commission. We're starting to see and think about the overlap in our supply chain security and cybersecurity. For instance, as connected and autonomous vehicles start becoming more commonplace. What does that mean for our supply chain security? How is cybersecurity, how do we keep the connected and autonomous vehicles safe and running on time and where they're supposed to be, and keep bad actors from influencing what they're going to do, and thereby disrupting our supply chain, or worse. So as the cybersecurity commission continues on their mission. We're hoping to work with them in kind of another layer of what the Supply Chain Council has actually looked at past what maybe it was originally intended to be. As I talked about, we have that 5-year resiliency action agenda that we want to go through, and that 20-year transportation resiliency and competitiveness plan. We'll probably need to update those as, like the MPOs, we have our 25-year, our long-range plans that go out 25 years as they're updated every 5 years. Every 5 years a lot of stuff changes. So once we get those, and those are a little ways off before we even start on those. We'll need to keep membership engaged in that. I try to find, and our members that will come up and say, I'd like to present at this next meeting or something like that. Or if they want to share something with the group, they can, or present at the meeting. So I like to have at each meeting, I try to get something new presented or have a speaker or somebody just to kind of facilitate dialogue and discussion or get the group thinking about certain things, or maybe they can learn about things that they don't think about, or learn something new when it comes to supply chain and especially in resiliency.
Drew, I have one more question,
Sure.
And that is, how are you going to keep the funding for this going kind of as a multi-year basis?
Very good question. Don't know yet. Right now, we've got some funding identified through the Office of Community Development, which has Louisiana is looking at about a $1.2 billion resiliency grant through the Community Development Block Grant Disaster Relief Fund through HUD. We are asking the Office of Community Development just for a little bit of that to fund the Supply Chain Council and this study long term. And that's why I say that our report in 2019, not only the time, but we won't have the funding to do the things with our university partners as far as modeling and data collection and things like that to really have the report that we want and envision by March of 2019. So we have that. We're hoping it's nothing set in stone. We've just submitted a request and we've submitted data to OCD that we can be a part of how they. And OCD, I'm sorry, everybody, that's the Office of Community Development in Louisiana. How we could utilize those funds to build resiliency in the state of Louisiana. Our other targets have been several private sector nonprofits that will donate to something, to a cause like this, or to a group like ours. Also, this vulnerability and adaptation assessment, Federal Highways had a grant tied to that we went after. However, we did not get it. And there's also a mega regions grant that Federal Highways just announced that we actually talking with some other MPOs in the state about possibly pursuing. Now, that won't be funding for the Supply Chain Council, but at our next meeting, we are going to talk to the group about what that mega regions project would be and how the Supply Chain Council could support it. So there are several other federal grants that would be able to support us that we kind of identify every once in a while. My position is an EDA-funded position with a match from the Office of Community Development already, but it runs out in a year. So once that is done, then the Supply Chain Council, if we do not have more funding to keep me on in this role, I'm not sure what will happen. We'll probably have to come up with a contingency for that as well. But funding will continue to be a challenge for sure.
Drew, I have I can ask a whole bunch of questions, but I will ask the people in the audience if they have any questions that they would want to ask or share or their own experiences, because I don't know how many other states have put in this type of resiliency, multi-jurisdictional, multi-agency, public-private, from a resiliency standpoint. I know a lot of people have talked about economic competitiveness as as a governor's tool and things of that nature, but I don't know if any of the other states on the call have done similar work or have had similar experiences.
Sure, and
the NPOs.
I'd love to hear of other experiences as well.
Drew, this is Cheryl again. I don't have experience in this. I have a question.
Yep.
When you're looking at this from a statewide and you've got these partners at the table, when you are analyzing your infrastructure for where's our vulnerable spots at, are you looking at the entire system? Are you looking at only the main, for a highway world, would you only look at the higher functional classifications, or is this going all the way down to a local road aspect, and that would, short lines, class ones, it kind of ripples through for all, but
right.
I'm trying to figure out how to get a handle on not only state assets, but city and county assets. What does that look like?
Right. So far, we've really just kind of gone at the higher level, the state and federal roads, where we can get that kind of data. We could really get down into the weeds at the MPO level with some of these city and county roads, and we haven't done that. And that's really going to be something that we're going to have to kind of bring up with the council if that's something they want to do. And I think it's really going to be a function of where our data takes us, and then also the time frame that we have. If we have the time to drill down that low, but right now I don't foresee us going anywhere deeper than at the state level.
If there's no other questions on anybody, I appreciate your time, and Drew, I appreciate you sharing your presentation, and Cheryl and Virginia were the ones that asked for it, so thank y'all both.
No, thank y'all. Thanks for having me, and there's my...
You just have your email. You didn't have a phone number.
Yeah.
I thought he planned it that way.
I did, but I can give you my phone number. It is 225. Actually, I don't even know my phone number here.
I'll share it. Just email it to me, and I'll share it with you.
Yep. I mean, that's the wonders of technology when you don't ever dial the thing. 225-383-5203. And if you have any questions or anything, please, give me a call, shoot me an email. I love to talk about this stuff, and I mean, I can talk about it all day, actually. So I'll be happy to share information, share ideas, bounce stuff back and forth. Anything, just shoot me an email, give me a call.
I appreciate you putting this on again. Personal thanks. As we are working with our standing up membership in the Freight Advisory Council, I'm trying to find and make sure we have enough functions to warrant bringing together some of those higher level folks. And I think this is something that could entice them. That's why I ask so many questions. So I appreciate it.
The two things I would say there is that the one is that when this was all brought together, we really had a strong project champion that actually just had so many relationships that they were those relationships fed into other strong relationships in the state that were really able to reach out and get the right amount of people together. And two, that funding becomes an issue.
Okay.
As you know, and it's sort of a chicken or an egg thing sometimes.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Okay.
Well, thank you. I agree. I'm going to echo Cheryl. This is Virginia. Thank you for sharing that again. I thought it was a fascinating presentation both times, and
Thank you.
I appreciate seeing it once again. It reinforced some things with me, so thank you
good.
very much.
Good. Thank you. You're welcome. And same, if you questions, give me a call, shoot me an email.
All right.
And I will be posting this on the website, as I mentioned, for reference for people.
Okay, great. All right.
If there's no other questions, thank you, Drew, for doing this again, and I'll talk to everybody later.
You're welcome.
All right. Thanks, guys.
All right,
Bye-bye.
thank you all.
Thanks for setting up.